No face is born evil. But no prolonged inner corruption leaves the face untouched. This is where most people misunderstand the idea of evil appearance. They assume it is about bone structure, eye shape, or inherited features. That belief is not only scientifically wrong, but morally dangerous. A human face is not destiny. It is a record, and what it records is not fate, but repeated inner states over time. The mind does not exist as an abstract concept floating inside the skull. It lives inside the nervous system, hormones, muscle tension, breathing patterns, and eye movement. When an emotion appears briefly, the face can hide it. But when a psychological state becomes habitual, prolonged greed, chronic resentment, constant competitiveness, the body loses the ability to pretend. Neuroscience calls this neuromuscular adaptation. Philosophy calls it karma made visible. Different languages, same truth. What is fed repeatedly becomes form. This must be stated clearly from the beginning. This analysis does not judge people by their faces. It examines the face as a consequence, not a cause. A person is not greedy because they look a certain way. They look a certain way because greed has lived inside them for too long. Humans can fake kindness in words. They can perform morality in social behavior. But facial muscles cannot lie indefinitely. Facial expression is governed largely by unconscious neural activity. And the unconscious does not serve social image. It serves survival, desire, and defense. Over time, it reshapes the face according to the dominant internal climate. Let us start with the most revealing feature, the eyes. A person dominated by long-term resentment and hostility does not have relaxed eyes. Not because they try to look intimidating, but because their nervous system is constantly in a state of threat detection. Elevated cortisol, overactive sympathetic nervous response, hypervigilant eye movement. The gaze is not deep. It is tight, not focused, but scanning. Such a person looks at the world as a battlefield where every interaction carries the potential for loss or humiliation. A chronically competitive person carries a similar pattern. Their eyes rarely rest, even in neutral situations. Their gaze measures, compares, evaluates. They are not present, they are ranking. This constant internal comparison slowly hardens the muscles around the eyes, creating a subtle but persistent sharpness that no smile can fully soften. Greed, however, produces a different signature. A greedy mind does not always look aggressive. Its eyes tend to cling. They attach to objects, opportunities, status symbols, and advantages. There is a slight delay when their gaze disengages, as if letting go costs effort. Dopamine-driven attention patterns dominate. The face begins to lean forward, imperceptibly at first, as if always reaching. This is not metaphorical. Dopamine-heavy behavioral patterns affect posture, facial tension, and micro-expressions. Over time, the face of a greedy person often loses softness not through anger, but through grasping. The jaw tightens, the lips compress subtly, the expression becomes expectant, never satisfied. Now consider sustained arrogance and ego fixation. An inflated ego reshapes the face by reducing emotional flexibility. The eyebrows lift less in curiosity. The eyes narrow more often in dismissal. Facial expressions become predictable, repetitive, and rigid. This rigidity is psychological before it is physical. The person no longer truly reacts to the world, they judge it. And judgment, when habitual, freezes expression. One of the most overlooked indicators is facial asymmetry under emotion. In emotionally healthy individuals, expressions activate muscles symmetrically and fluidly. In people dominated by internal conflict, envy mixed with desire, fear mixed with pride, expressions often become uneven. One side of the face reacts faster, tighter, or more intensely. This is not superstition. It reflects chronic imbalance in emotional processing between brain hemispheres under stress. What people often call a dark face is rarely about darkness. It is about tension without release. Relaxed faces change easily. Tense faces repeat themselves. Over years, repetition becomes structure. This is why short-term emotions do not define appearance, but long-term mental habits do. A kind person can be angry without looking cruel. A disciplined person can desire without looking desperate. But when anger, desire, and comparison become identity, the face slowly adapts to serve that identity. And here lies the most uncomfortable truth. The face does not expose evil to others first, it reveals it to the person themselves. That faint heaviness in the eyes, that stiffness in the jaw, that inability to fully relax the expression even in silence. These are not signs of fate, they are feedback. In the next part, we will move deeper, from observation to mechanism, and examine how greed, anger, and obsession physically reshape facial muscles, posture, and micro-expressions through neurochemistry, and why this process is almost impossible to reverse without inner change. To understand why long-term mental states shape the face, we must strip away morality and look at biology. The face does not change because of evil, in a spiritual sense. It changes because the nervous system adapts to what it is forced to repeat. The human face contains more than 40 muscles, many of which are controlled involuntarily. These muscles respond not to intention, but to neurochemical environments. When certain chemicals dominate the brain for long periods, the face becomes their physical echo. Let us begin with anger and resentment. Chronic anger is not an emotion, it is a physiological condition. When anger becomes habitual, the body maintains elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline. This keeps the sympathetic nervous system permanently active. Muscles remain partially contracted even at rest. The jaw tightens, the brow lowers, the muscles around the eyes stay alert, never fully releasing. Over time, the face of a chronically angry person develops a baseline tension. Even in neutral moments, their expression looks guarded or severe, not because they choose it, but because their nervous system has forgotten how to relax. This is why people dominated by resentment often say, "I'm not angry," and genuinely believe it. Their body has normalized tension. Calm now feels unfamiliar. Now consider greed and compulsive desire. Greed is driven primarily by dopamine. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure, but of anticipation. It fires when the brain expects reward, not when reward is received. A greedy mind therefore lives in a constant forward-leaning state, always oriented toward the next gain. Biologically, this creates subtle but persistent effects. Dopamine biases attention. The eyes fixate longer, the head tilts slightly forward. Facial muscles orient toward acquisition rather than openness. The mouth tightens, not in anger, but in expectation. This produces a facial quality people often describe as never satisfied. The expression does not rest. Even in stillness, there is motion beneath the surface. Importantly, greed does not always look hostile. It often looks calculating, calm, polite, even charming, but internally tense. Over time, this internal tension reshapes micro-expressions, brief flashes of impatience, disappointment, or irritation when expectations are not met. These flashes repeat. Repetition becomes pattern. Pattern becomes appearance. Now look at obsession and competitiveness. Obsessive comparison keeps the brain in a loop of evaluation. The mind is rarely present, it is measuring. This engages the prefrontal cortex continuously, preventing emotional resolution. The face reflects this through rigidity. Eyebrows move less freely, smiles appear delayed or incomplete. Eye contact feels strategic rather than connective. The muscles learn to hold rather than respond. Competitiveness also suppresses vulnerability. Over time, expressions associated with openness, soft eye widening, relaxed mouth corners, weaken. The face becomes armored. None of this happens quickly. That is the crucial point. A single moment of anger does nothing. A year of anger changes posture. A decade of anger changes bone alignment. The same applies to greed and obsession. Biology is patient. It does not judge. It simply adapts. One of the clearest indicators of long-term internal imbalance is micro-expression leakage. Micro-expressions are involuntary facial movements lasting fractions of a second. They occur before conscious control engages. In emotionally integrated individuals, these expressions align with spoken intent. In internally conflicted individuals, they contradict it. For example, a smile that appears half a second too late. Eyes that narrow briefly before widening. A jaw tightening just before agreement. These are not lies. They are unresolved internal states surfacing momentarily. When such leakage happens repeatedly over years, facial muscles begin to favor those movements. The face starts to reveal what the person themselves may no longer recognize consciously. Another overlooked factor is breathing. Chronic stress alters breathing patterns. Shallow breathing reduces oxygen delivery and keeps the body in defensive mode. This subtly affects facial color, muscle tone, and expressiveness. Relaxed breathing produces fluid expressions. Restricted breathing produces sharp, angular ones. Again, this is not destiny, it is physiology responding to habit. The face is not punished for inner states. It is trained by them. At this point, a critical clarification is necessary. None of these features mean a person is evil. They mean the person is internally burdened. Long-term greed, anger, and obsession are not signs of strength. They are signs of a nervous system under continuous strain. This is why truly dangerous individuals often appear calm, controlled, even pleasant at first glance. Their face may not look evil in a dramatic sense. Instead, it lacks warm variability. It does not respond, it evaluates. Evil, when it exists, is rarely loud. It is efficient. And efficiency leaves a different mark than rage. In the next part, we will shift from biology to perception, exploring why humans intuitively sense something off about certain faces, how subconscious pattern recognition works, and why this intuition is often accurate yet dangerously misunderstood. Humans sense danger in faces faster than they can explain it. This is not mysticism, it is biology. Long before language, the human nervous system evolved to read micro-signals, tension, unpredictability, incongruence. A face that does not align internally triggers unease, not because it looks ugly or strange, but because it feels unstable. The key word here is incongruence. A healthy face is internally consistent. The eyes, mouth, posture, and timing of expression move together. Even when the emotion is negative, the signal is coherent. Anger looks like anger, sadness looks like sadness, calm looks like calm. A face shaped by prolonged inner conflict does not have this coherence. The smile does not reach the eyes. The eyes react before the mouth. The expression changes too late, or too early. The brain registers this mismatch instantly, long before conscious thought catches up. This is why people often say, "I don't know why, but something felt off." What they are sensing is not evil. They are sensing unresolved internal tension. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, does not care about morality. It cares about predictability. Faces that behave predictably are safe. Faces that behave inconsistently demand caution. This is where intuition becomes powerful and dangerous. Humans are exceptionally good at detecting emotional leakage, but terrible at interpreting its cause. We sense tension, but we often assign the wrong meaning to it. A traumatized person may look guarded. A depressed person may look distant. A chronically stressed person may look cold. None of these mean malice. This is why judging character based on facial appearance alone is both inaccurate and unethical. The face tells us about inner load, not moral value. However, there is a distinction that matters. Faces shaped by suffering tend to carry weight without sharpness. Their tension feels heavy, inward, self-directed. Faces shaped by long-term greed, domination, or contempt tend to carry sharpness without depth. Their tension feels outward, evaluative, strategic. People rarely articulate this difference consciously, but they feel it. One feels tired. The other feels calculating. Another critical factor is eye behavior during silence. When a person is not speaking, the face relaxes toward its baseline state. This baseline is extremely revealing. Trained observers look not at expressions during interaction, but at expressions between interactions. A face that softens naturally in silence suggests internal regulation. A face that tightens or scans during silence suggests internal vigilance. This vigilance is common in competitive, power-oriented, or manipulative personalities. Their nervous system remains on, even when nothing is happening. The world is never neutral to them, it is always a field of advantage and threat. Importantly, this does not make them villains. It makes them adapted to a hostile internal model of reality. Now we must address a deeply uncomfortable truth. Humans are drawn to faces that reflect confidence, control, and emotional restraint. These traits are often confused with strength and reliability. But emotional restraint and emotional integration are not the same thing. A person who suppresses emotion appears controlled. A person who processes emotion appears fluid. Suppression hardens the face over time. Processing keeps it mobile. This is why some of the most socially successful individuals carry subtle facial coldness. Their expressions are efficient, not warm. Their presence commands attention, not safety. People may follow them, even admire them, while simultaneously feeling unease they cannot explain. This is not accidental. Faces that signal dominance without empathy trigger compliance. Evolutionarily, this makes sense, but it also explains why societies repeatedly elevate individuals whose inner states are unresolved, but whose outer signals are decisive. Here lies the great misinterpretation. People say, "I knew something was wrong with them. I could see it in their face." What they often mean is, "I sensed internal misalignment, but I assumed it meant moral corruption." Sometimes it does, often, it does not. The face reveals pressure points, not intentions. The most dangerous mistake is to believe that evil has a specific look. It does not. Evil, when it manifests, borrows whatever face is most useful. Sometimes it looks charming, sometimes gentle, sometimes ordinary. What the face does reveal reliably is this: how much inner tension a person is carrying, and whether that tension is directed inward or outward. Outward directed tension correlates with control, manipulation, and domination. Inward directed tension correlates with anxiety, shame, and withdrawal. They feel different. They look subtly different. But neither should be confused with destiny. In the next part, we will confront the most important question of all. Can the face be changed once it has been shaped by greed, anger, and obsession? And if so, what kind of inner transformation is required, not cosmetically, but neurologically? The face is not a prison, but it is not easily rewritten. Once prolonged greed, anger, or obsession has reshaped facial tension, the change is not merely aesthetic, it is neurological. Muscles follow nerves, nerves follow chemistry, and chemistry follows habit. So the real question is not whether the face can change, but what kind of change is required for it to do so. The short answer is uncomfortable. Surface correction does almost nothing. Smiling more does not soften the face. Relaxation techniques without inner resolution do not last. Cosmetic alteration changes shape, not expression. The face reflects baseline state, not performance. To reverse long-term facial hardening, three systems must shift together: the nervous system, the emotional processing loop, and the perception of the world itself. Let us begin with the nervous system. Chronic anger and competitiveness keep the body locked in sympathetic dominance: fight, defend, compare. To soften the face, the body must relearn parasympathetic safety. This does not happen through positive thinking. It happens through repeated experiences of non-threat. Silence without vigilance. Interaction without ranking. Stillness without anticipation. When these experiences repeat, cortisol levels drop, breathing deepens, and facial muscles regain resting length. This is why some people appear visibly different after long periods away from competition-driven environments. Their faces do not change because they became better people, but because their nervous systems finally stood down. Next comes emotional processing. Unresolved emotions do not disappear. They stay active in the background, constantly influencing micro-expressions. People dominated by greed and resentment often suppress vulnerability. Suppression freezes expression. Processing restores movement. Processing means allowing emotions to complete their physiological cycle. Anger that is acknowledged, felt, and resolved does not stay in the jaw. Desire that is examined does not stay in the eyes. Shame that is integrated does not stay in the posture. This is why people who have genuinely confronted their inner patterns, not justified them, not reframed them, but understood and metabolized them, often look younger. Even without physical change, their faces move again. The third system is perception. A person who sees the world as hostile cannot look relaxed within it. This is the most difficult shift of all, because it requires dismantling an internal worldview built for survival. Greed assumes scarcity. Competition assumes hierarchy. Resentment assumes injustice is personal. As long as these assumptions remain active, the face will carry their tension. True softening occurs only when the internal model of reality changes, when the world is no longer scanned for advantage or threat by default. This is not naivete. It is recalibration. Importantly, this process cannot be rushed. The face changes at the speed of safety. Months, sometimes years, not days. And here is a truth rarely spoken. Some faces never fully soften. Not because change is impossible, but because the person never leaves the internal environment that shaped them. Power, status, constant comparison, these reinforce the very patterns that hardened the face in the first place. There is also a paradox worth noting. Some individuals appear to improve morally but look harsher over time. This usually happens when discipline replaces greed, but empathy does not replace control. The person stops chasing, but starts judging. Tension shifts location, but does not dissolve. Softness is not weakness. It is the absence of unnecessary defense. Finally, we must reject the romantic idea that suffering alone purifies the face. Suffering without insight often deepens rigidity. Only meaningful resolution restores flexibility. The face does not reward pain. It reflects integration. In the final part, we will confront the deepest implication of this entire analysis. What it means to live with a face shaped by one's inner life, and why the face ultimately judges nothing, but remembers everything. The face does not judge. It remembers. This is the most important correction to make after everything that has been said. The face is not a moral verdict. It is not a label. It does not declare who someone is. It records what has been repeated. Every human face begins as possibility. What it becomes is accumulation. The face remembers how often anger was chosen over understanding. How often comparison replaced presence. How often desire was allowed to run without reflection. Not once, not occasionally, but habitually. This is why the face cannot be used to predict a future, only to reveal a past. And this is where most interpretations fail. People look at a hardened face and assume cruelty. People look at a soft face and assume virtue. Both assumptions are wrong. A gentle-looking face can carry avoidance. A A sharp-looking face can carry exhaustion. A calm face can hide calculation. A tense face can hide fear. The face does not reveal intention. It reveals internal load. What it shows most clearly is not evil, but where a person has been living internally. Someone who has lived in constant comparison will carry vigilance. Someone who has lived in scarcity will carry grasping. Someone who has lived in resentment will carry defense. These are not sins. They are strategies. The danger arises when strategies are mistaken for identity. A person is not their face, but they cannot escape the feedback it provides. The face is one of the few mirrors that cannot flatter. It does not care about self-image, social role, or narrative. It reflects the nervous system as it is, not as it wishes to be seen. This is why long-term self-deception eventually fails. You can convince others with words. You can convince yourself with stories. But you cannot convince your facial muscles forever. And yet, this is not a fatalistic conclusion. Because what the face records, it also updates. Slowly, reluctantly, but honestly. When greed loosens its grip, the eyes stop reaching. When resentment resolves, the jaw releases. When comparison ends, the gaze rests. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But measurably. This is why true inner change is often noticed by others before it is noticed by the person themselves. Someone will say, "You look different," without being able to explain why. They are not seeing beauty. They are seeing reduced tension. And reduced tension is one of the rarest signals in modern society. We live in environments that reward alertness, competition, and performance. These environments shape faces quickly. They teach people to look decisive, controlled, efficient, but they rarely teach people to look at ease. Ease is not passive. It is regulated strength. A face at ease does not dominate a room. It stabilizes it. This is why such faces are increasingly uncommon and increasingly valuable. The final truth is this. There is no such thing as a permanently evil face. But there are faces that have not yet been allowed to rest. And there is no moral superiority in softness. Only evidence of resolution. So the question is not, what does this person's face say about them? The real question is, what is my own face slowly learning to remember? Because every glance, every reaction, every repeated inner stance is being recorded, quietly, patiently, without judgment. And one day, without warning, the mirror will stop asking who you want to be, and simply show who you have been practicing.